Rita.
Hey, Rita Mookerjee here, coming to you from Ames, Iowa, maybe the most boring place ever. I'm a co-founder of Honey Literary. I'm the assistant poetry editor for Split Lip magazine, and I'm a reader for Pink. I'll pass it off to Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason B. Crawford, they, he pronouns, and I am the co-founder of the Knights Library magazine, and we'll go to Zora.
Hi, y'all. I'm Zora, she, her pronouns. I am a co-founder of the Estuary Collective, as well as currently serving as the managing editor for Kissing Dynamite Poetry.
Dope, thank you so much. So it's my intention to go around. I have some questions that I have prepared, and then I hope to just engage in a discussion and then answer any questions that we might get in the chat. But I was thinking we'll just give everybody a moment to answer this question that wants to answer it. So if you feel compelled, please speak. And also you can unmute yourselves, because I was thinking we can just do like, literally, I just want this to be like a salon, like a round table, like we can just chat. So the first question is, I want to know what the first thing you look for in a submission is.
So for me, when I'm looking at submissions, we actually put together a submission packet this morning, so it helps. I was literally just doing this 2 hours ago. But for me, if I'm looking at a submission, I want to see, first and foremost, and this may be a little tedious, but how closely they followed our submission guidelines, especially when it comes down to like how they address the editors. I've seen that a lot, how you address the editors. How are you submitting too many poems? Are you submitting, too many prose pieces, too many words? We have our submission guidelines for a reason. So I definitely try to stick to that as closely as possible. I'm of course lenient. Like if you submit 12 pages and we said 10 pages, if you submitted 4,400 words and we say 4,000 words for a fiction piece, we're not gonna be like, oh nope, that's no, we'll still read it. But if you give me, I've gotten 19 pages of work and I'm like, that's a chapbook, I'm not reading that. So that's basically for us, that's the first thing I look at for sure.
Diving into the submission itself, I need to be shocked, titillated, taken in some way. I don't believe in poetry that doesn't have a sense of urgency. We have centuries of white men telling us about a tree.
We sure do.
I've seen many a tree. I'm from Pennsylvania. Okay, that means Penn's Woods. Okay, that's a tree-oriented place. So if you send me up to my journals, which all the journals I work for are explicitly feminist, they're explicitly intersectional. At Honey, we're actually BIPOC queer centric. We do have some white contributors, but they submit to us understanding that we're not prioritizing white authors. Similarly, I don't prioritize like pretty poems or like poems that are doing really beautiful things with form. My boy Josh is in the comments talking about trees and cornfields, baby. Y'all, I don't want to hear poems about the kudzu or the ivy. I don't give a shit. Are you kidding me? This is 2021 and you want to tell me about the trees? No. If you're going to tell me about the trees, you better make it be like Tiana Clark, okay?
Yes,
give me
and
some urgency. I want to see some stakes. And so ultimately, regardless of tone and form and tradition, I need a sense of urgency. I've actually published, Jason, had the honor of publishing a piece of Jason's work, and it was right when I joined Split Lip, y'all. And my editor, Will, said, I think you really need to see something, and sent me this piece. And it was about dancing and glitter and clubbing and being on the block and drinking with friends, and just there was just a world in there, and I felt very compelled. I felt very drawn, and so I need that hook. you know, it can even upset me. I love if like somebody like shocks me or is like really ratchet, raunchy in a poem. I love that too, but I need that hook in some capacity.
Can I ask which Jason poem it was?
It was Unicorn Kids. What is that? Unicorn Kids Dance
Unicorn Kids Dance Underneath the Moonlight 2.
2. And the two makes it for me. The 2 makes it.
It's an iconic poem. I've read that poem.
Mhm. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
I think for me, in terms of what I look for, I generally with Kissing Dynamite, I try to keep an overall like open mind in terms of what I'm expecting to read. So I don't necessarily always look at the letter to the editor first. I only will read the addressing of the editor after the poem, and normally only if the poem raises some flags for me. Like if I read the poem and the poem is like is very like I read it and I'm like, oh, you don't read Kissing Dynamite, and I can tell based off of the poem that you submit. Like if I can tell that you don't read our magazine by your poem, then I'm going to go and read your letter to the your letter to address the editors. And then when it's like only addressing Christine, who's our editor in chief, rather than the team.
True.
Or if it's like if it's something like that, then that's when I'll look at the letter addressing the editorial team. But normally, like what I look for is intention. What I look for is excitement. Like I try not to like have too many restrictions, otherwise then it'll become really easy to pander to me specifically, which you can totally do it, totally pander to me specifically. However, we just went through another round for the May issue of Kissing Dynamite, and somebody did pander to me specifically, but they did not pander well. So if you're gonna pander to me, make sure your poem is good. Because if I have to read something that makes me feel like my interests have been disrespected, then there's another issue.
Well, at least you didn't get the Nazi poem that Jenny and I got.
Oh,
Damn.
gross.
Yeah, like this, I feel like submissions in my experience working, because I've worked with Kissing Dynamite, I've worked with Texas Borderlands Review, I've worked with OK Donkey, and I worked with OK Donkey as a manuscript reader rather than like a magazine reader. And in those 3 experiences, I've learned that like the energy of submissions very much so reflects whatever is going on. And I don't just mean that in terms of like the urgency of somebody's poems. Most of the time, it may not even be the urgency of the poem itself. It may be like the energy the poem gives off. And what I mean by that is like, this recent round, this May round for Kissing Dynamite has been one of the most abysmal rounds that I have ever experienced. And not because like they weren't good poets, but because I could just feel everyone was tired and like everybody was ready to give up.
100%.
And I could feel that just based if it like, even if the poem, the concept of the poem was interesting, they had my interest, they had me engaged, something would happen midway through where I could just tell, oh, you gave up halfway through because you thought, what's the point with everything going on? What's the point of this poem? And you gave up. And I could feel that, like, and if I can feel you give up in your poem, then why should I continue to read your poem? And that brings me to the thing that I think is, I'm not normally a form person, but I think the thing that I normally look for the most is structure. If your poem structurally does not make sense, then it's going to be a huge flag for me. And that's normally the don'ts that I look for rather than the yeses. The yeses, in terms of what I look for, is a lot harder to answer because I don't know until it's right in front of me. And I'm like, actually, yes, this. Like,
What about you, Ashley?
I mean, like, I'm going to echo what a lot of people have said so far. It's just that, like, the very first thing I look for is that I want this piece to like mean something. I want to be grabbed by it. I want this poem or this whatever because I read everything for sundress. Like I want this poem or this piece to like really sit me down in a chair and be like, whoa, I need to like reevaluate my life right now because this poem is so good. So that's the first thing I look for. Like, is it a good poem in that like Rita said, either I'm shocked by it or, you know, or it like actually says something. I don't want a poem just to write a poem. I have my children for that. Like, I don't need, like, I don't need you to just like turn in something, submit something that you don't care about. Like, I want you to care about it. And like, you can tell if someone cares or not.
You totally can.
Oh yeah, that reminds me, Ashley. A lot of people who submit to poetry in general, and that's my experience across all the magazines that I've worked for, is that there's a good portion of them don't take poetry seriously and like think poetry is journal entries. Like they think, oh, I can send in a journal entry and that's a poem, right? And
Sis,
that's the thing that frustrates me the most is like, you don't actually believe in this art form and it shows. So I totally agree. I was just affirming what Ashley says is like, I got to know that you care about this. If I could tell you don't, then.
Yeah. And thinking about the politics of caring and urgency and what Ashley's describing with like, there needs to be some purpose. There needs to be some deeper, some marrow there that we want to get to. Speaking on that particularly, I'm very disappointed by the number of people who send work out because they want to comment on a cultural moment. And I think that's really excellent. I love, journaling or free writing or making that space to work through things. In our time, in our life, we have just witnessed another wave of violence at the behest of law enforcement and racist white people. We have lost more Black people. The list is becoming impossible to remember. That is fine if you have an impulse to go and write about that. It does not mean necessarily that you have the right or the authority to speak on a topic. And so what I'm getting at is there's been a lot of white people in all of my submissions categories writing on Black Lives Matter, writing on George Floyd, writing on Breonna Taylor, writing on Remy. I can't even continue, right? There's so many names. I don't want to hear white people explaining Black lived experience. That's completely inappropriate. There are some powers that be, Poetry Foundation, okay, that have deluded people into thinking that that type of writing has a place or that everyone has the right to make that critical intervention. And I'm here to tell you, please tell everyone you know, stop it. That is not appropriate. It's disrespectful. You're taking the mic from people who actually have a lived experience, have a vested interest in this topic, and are capable of creating commentary around it.
Rita, what you just said, like, I had to unmute because I was like literally clapping for you because that's like what I write about. Like a lot of what I write about. And like what I found from like my submitting is that like people don't care if I'm saying it, but people care if someone else says it. And I'm like, I'm sorry for your ancestors. So like
I'm like, pardon me, I missed
people.
Exactly. I'm like, sorry, Matthew Dickman, I missed the part where you understand anything about Blackness and
100%.
about, I'm repulsed by this. And so like, as a non-Black person of color, I feel very protective and very aggressive of Black writers in our community, particularly folks like y'all who write on these issues explicitly and have been doing so for some time. I see in a lot of time, like in a PhD program, in an MFA program, I see professors encouraging people to, write on current events, write on nascent events. Mm-hmm. You can do that, recognize where you stand in relation to those events and make that clear. You don't get to imagine well, what if I was a Black man in this personal time? Wow, I bet I would have some things to say. Like that's
And the
nothing.
people can't say them for themselves.
As if we don't have Black people to speak
Right.
on that. And I really feel strongly about that. And please, y'all, everybody attending today, you know, I'm at Rita Mookerjee on Twitter. If you see nonsense, get in my DMs. I'm always happy to give somebody a piece of my mind.
So I feel like a lot of people want to do the work of correcting or benefiting society for Black and brown individuals and don't know how to do the work, so they think that they have to write the work, and that's not the work that we need to correct, or not even correct, to make a better future. It's not the written work. We have the people doing the written language and putting that down on paper because we're the one living the experiences. The work should be being out there and actually putting into policy and changing legislation and all that stuff, and like making sure that we can make it safe for Black and brown people to survive. You don't have to write a poem about it. I don't need that poem. I need you to actually change it, right? Like not the work. We don't need the language. We need the actual physical work.
And
And
like
it's-
that's part. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, and I was just gonna say, and like that's part of why the Estuary Collective was like founded in the first place, was to give a place for Black and brown folks to be able to like exist in a space where whiteness, I mean, like, yeah, y'all can come, but I mean, like, it's not about you. Like a space that centers brown and Black writers, because there is no like real quote unquote space for that, right? Like if I were to go back to undergrad, I went to a predominantly white school, and like if I were to go back there and write what I've been writing now, like I'd be massacred, because I'm saying screw all of you, like all of these, like it's not a safe space for everybody, and that's what we want, is that space for people to feel like they can share their work without being judged for it.
Yeah. And also without being like policed for it, or like without being told that their experiences aren't real. Like Ashley, I also went to a predominantly white undergraduate program. And when I would talk about these things in my art, it wasn't even like white people would get mad. It was more like they just inherently didn't understand. They'd be so confused. They'd hyperfixate on details just because they
Didn't have the range.
And like same thing with like and that's been true for most of my experience up until we founded the Estuary. And I think I think when white people write these protests, because I read a lot of white people protest poems last summer, a lot of them. I don't ever want to read another white person protest poem ever again.
That's real. That's real.
But what angers me when I read these poems is not just like the audacity, but also I can tell they're coming from this innate sense to like, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt and be like, okay, maybe you do want to do the work.
Sure.
Maybe. I'll pretend for a second that I believe it. But I want to know why your first instinct then, if you really want to do this work, is to speak over another person, is to correct their experiences, to make them feel like their lived experience isn't real, is to make them feel smaller in their own body and in their own words. Like, why is that your first instinct? Why is your first instinct to care actually is your first instinct to police?
Yes. Yes. To colonize, right? And commandeer spaces that we've signposted. We write these beautiful websites. We have all type of people on Wix and stuff and WordPress. We put a lot of care into our calls for submissions, all of the publications represented today. And it's not unclear. I've had a number of white people send to me at Honey Lit, and what they say is, I believe I'm showing support for Black, Indigenous, and people of color by sending to your journal.
And that's
And
the
that's-
quite opposite, right?
That's really the, absolutely, Ashley, that's the diametric opposite, diametrically opposed. You're taking up space when you do that. And what you're saying is, I see your mission statement, but I still think that I am an exception and I'm going to go ahead and send anyway. And what that tells me is you don't respect me, you don't respect my co-founder, and you didn't do the reading.
There's also a very strong romanticization of like of POC violence, and it's not like within, not just within their own culture, but if you think about like a lot of magazines, a lot of big magazines profit off of the violence to queer POC bodies and you know, cishet POC bodies as well, right? So because you know they want to jump in the moment, you know, the moment right now is like today is, you know, again, Black Lives Matter, which is always a moment, but for larger entities, it becomes a moment when it needs to be. And when it needs to be, then of course, magazines will jump in and be like, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter too. We want these poems. We want to have these, you know, POC centric issues and things like that. And we're going to show support this way. But really all you're doing is trying to put yourself on the map and be out there for people to subscribe and read your stuff, right? And then next week it's going to be back to the same trees that you're going to be talking about. And a lot of people will think, well, the only way I'm getting published, you know, this month is if I got a protest poem. So, you know, that's just my 2 cents.
And like that's incredibly like disheartening as a person of color, as a Black woman specifically. Like that's like really disheartening when people do that. When I've been trying to sub to y'all all year, the past 2 years, however long I've been subbing. Oh, but now I'm important. But now I'm important because I'm Black, as if I wasn't Black 3 years ago. As if Black lives just started mattering. Boy, please be quiet.
Yeah.
And like people never
yeah.
see that about submissions either, like that it is taking up space. It's like you are sending your work to take up space in an issue. And like if you're doing that, not thinking about the space, if you're submitting your work and not thinking at all about the space that you're submitting it to, have you read an issue? Have you read the submission guidelines? Do you know who the editors are? I wanted to say earlier when we were talking about this, I personally get a huge literary boner when people mention like my name. And I know that they like went on the website and read that I am the editor. I'm like, okay, dope. So you probably read a Spilled Ink poem too. Also, I forgot to mention, I'm also a reader for Kissing Dynamite and for Stone of Madness. I got to give a shout out to my other mags. I love them. But truly, that's the thing about like speaking in the moment. It's like, okay, I'm glad you want to be a part of the moment. But now, if you actually really, I need you to slow down, slow your roll, think about what that means. Do you think you should take up space in that mag? Or if you're a mag, do you publish by POC authors regularly anyway? Do you actually? Go back, read every bio.
Also, who's on your editorial team? Like that's the thing that I come back to time and time again, is that like I inherently distrust any magazine that says, oh, I really give a fuck about Black people. I really care about brown people, but actually I don't have a single Black or brown person on my editorial team. And I have not made the effort to change that. And so like that's what, when I hear all that, that's what tells me they're really performative, that they care about it for the moment, for now, like it's performance, their care is performance only. And it happens time and time again whenever like a magazine decides that, like an all-white editorial magazine decides to publish a white guilt poem or decides to, because I remember that happened earlier in the year, and it was like this man alluding to like I forgot what it was. He was like using like ice and like talking about caging children, to talk about like and fantasizing about being the guard who cages the children. And then when he got called out by it, by Taylor Bias and like the rest of us, he was like, no, I was actually talking about my alcoholism. And then like when the editors were asked, what the fuck, what were you thinking? Like the moment that like I saw that poem and I went and looked at the editor group, and it was all white women. And they pulled, I don't remember correctly if they pulled the poem or if he pulled the poem out of embarrassment, because he was getting dragged for a full 12 hours. His editors responded, because the magazine was a British magazine, which I felt is another issue, is like, why are you gonna, if you're a British magazine, why are you publishing poems about US problems? How is that appropriate?
No.
Like, how would it be really appropriate for an American magazine to publish about Brexit? Or
or just why? Like, why? Like, I mean, I guess you can, but like, for what? Like,
I mean, you can if you have the range, but most people don't.
Yeah.
Most people don't have the range. If you're going to write about complicated issues, make sure you have the range, and make sure the editors who are reading your stuff have the range.
Yeah.
Because if your editors don't have the range, they're going to publish anything.
Poetry. Okay.
And on that beautiful end note, do you mind if we move on to the second question?
Yes.
Cool. So, part of something that I really want to get into is, how does your magazine handle submissions? So my question is, what do you like about the way that your org handles submissions? For example, I like at Kissing Dynamite that my packet comes in the form of a spreadsheet, and I literally click on the poem and it opens it up to the Google Doc, and then I put in my answer and my comments in a Google spreadsheet.
So I'm not going to speak so much about Honey on this, because as a lot of y'all know, Honey is a baby. Honey was born just this past year, and we're having the time of our lives. Issue 2 is coming out. Get ready, prepare your bodies. So Split Lip is a lot more established, and Split Lip has the finances and the privilege to be on, thanks, Dia, to be on Submittable, which I'm sure everyone knows this, but just in case any of our attendees don't, a basic package of Submittable is about $1,500. It is incredibly expensive to use that interface, and it is a gatekeeping mechanism. It is in place to make sure that people who look like us don't or can't enter. Dorothy and I are just kind of like, financing Honey for now. We hope someday to have our own interface, but that's not the case. So I'm talking specifically about Submittable with Split Lip. My editor-in-chief is a white woman. Her name's Maureen Langloss, and she is not playing with things like abuse, with things like appropriation, with things like triggers. We have in our Submittable page labels for everything. We have a label for, this person didn't follow the directions. This person is writing something really, violent. That's $1,500 a year, actually, yes. And that's just basic with like 2 logins. So what masthead do you know has 2 people on it? That's crazy. So we have labels, we have protocols, especially if we see, because we keep a blacklist, and this has been a conversation on Twitter recently. I'm proud to keep a blacklist. I'm proud to be a part of the Whisper Network. I will not sit by while queers and femmes and people of color are overtly and explicitly abused. And so we're very quick to flag people who, and Hooligan too, yeah. And so we're really quick to say, hey, everybody, heads up, if in case you read this, there is a trigger warning for racial violence. And I gotta say, like, coming into a predominantly white masthead, that meant a lot to me. that showed me a lot of character on behalf of senior editors and people who came before me. I love that my editor-in-chief also does like sort of check-ins. So we all watched the verdict for a murder that we all saw in real time and knew exactly what happened. And so, you know, she just we'll have a Slack thread sometimes, and she'll just check in. She'll be like, hey, everybody, I know that was a lot today. I know that we're hurting. And, you know, if anybody needs anything, I'm here. Let's just all try to lift each other up in this time. That attention to support is really exciting.
I just want to piggyback and say that Maureen is amazing. So as a person that has spoken with her many times, I, as most people know, am very fond of Split Lip as a place to submit your poems. One of the things I guess that I love about our submissions, well, as the person that puts the packet together, nothing. Because so what I think what other people that are reading are some for my team that reads the submissions, what they really enjoy is that we take the time, me and the other person that is in charge with me, Alex, what we'll do is we'll sit down on every other Sunday and we will put together the full packet. So we grab all the poems out of there and number them. We'll make voting forms for them, and you know, we'll make a little spreadsheet so we know who is who, so it can all be quote unquote blind. We look over the poems, we make sure, you know, there's nothing that's going to be overly detrimental to our readers. So you know we're trusting you, you're trusting us as a reader to protect you as well. So we make sure you're protected when we send those things out. And you know, we give them, you know, a couple weeks to read over and do your voting. But for me, I really like how we've kind of made this system where, you know, you do a Google form, you vote, and then I'm able to go in and tally it and see what the votes were and say, okay, you know, this looks like it's a XYZ number. Let's go ahead and read that poem again. Why did this poem get this number? It really narrows down, and it makes it real easy, because some of the poems at the beginning we're reading over and I'm like, oh shit, I'm glad we didn't, you know, have to read this shit again type thing. So yeah, that's what I like about ours for sure.
So like, I'll start with sundress, I guess. Like for sundress, our process is very, like, to me, it's very simple. I get sent the like work, I give it a score, and I send it back. Like it's very simple, but some of ours are not blind, some of ours are. So it's good in the sense that I can see who wrote it. So in case they wrote something, I don't know, racist, misogynist, whatever, I can be like, yeah, no, this person, I don't think so, right? But I really appreciate the fact that we get multiple people looking at the same work. Because I know like some orgs do it differently, where like only one person reads this group, one person reads this group, and there's no like swapping. But no, like everything at Sundress is like, what's your score out of 1 on 10? What's your score out of 1 on 10? Okay, like what's the average number? And then, you know, we take it from there, whichever, you know, side they fall on.
That's so democratic. That's so democratic. I love it.
Yeah.
For sundress funds, yeah.
Yeah, and like that kind of goes to like I just read some broadsides that that goes for the broadsides, that goes for our residencies, that goes for our chapbooks, our full lengths. Like everyone gets a vote as to whether something moves forward or not. And also we have enough time to actually, you know, read through things and not have to rush through. And that's really important to me as an educator outside of the lit world, because we have a lot on our plate. Like everyone has their own things going on. So having like the right amount of time to make a good decision is really, really important. So those are some of the things that I appreciate about Sundress. For Estuary, we're still babies too. So it's like, we're still like tweaking some things. But I do love the setup of like how submissions come in, because like that's a very simple process. So yay for that. Jeni's a maid, like she's a boss. So I don't know how she does this, but I'm like, okay, Jeni, I'll go, here and do this. So it's like she's like really streamlined everything for the Estuary Collective. So yeah.
Yeah, shout out to Jeni. She's really the best. And like that
Shout
goes
out
for
to Jeni.
everything. Yeah, shout out to Jeni. And that goes really for everything, as well as so Sofia mentioned earlier that what they really enjoy about being a reader for Kissing Dynamite is that like you can go and do the packet like and on the spreadsheet. So the way we split up submissions is in two forms. Both me and Jeni serve as managing editors, and so for us that means two different things. For me, I'll split up the poem. So at the very beginning of the month, we have our submission period. Once that submission period closes, it's my responsibility to then go in and split up however many poems we got evenly across each team, because we have 3 readers. They're split up between our 3 editors, the editor-in-chief, and then me and Jeni. And then once I split up the poems, Jeni then takes those poems and puts them in a spreadsheet that makes it very easy for our readers to go through them rather than having to necessarily go through the folder that I made. But what I really like about this system that we once it's all split up, we all read the poems that are in our packets individually. Editor meets with reader. Then whatever poems the editor and the reader agree on, it goes to the second round of like the editor's table, where all the editors talk about, okay, here are the poems we really think out of all the ones we've selected will go on to publication. What I really like about this was prior to the beginning of this year, our setup was a lot different. That put a lot more of the work on our editor-in-chief. Christine would essentially have to go through every single poem and pull out every poem that was a no-go before giving it to me and Jeni to go through and make the decisions for. And it was very like a very rigorous process for Christine specifically. It was very strenuous on her. So once we started this new year, we were like, we need to get a new system. And that was the system that we came up with.
Thank you. My next question is, what is important to you in terms of what you publish? And I'm going to speak for Hooligan, and I'm going to say it's also the first thing I look for in a submission, which is honestly the author's voice. I really want to hear the author's voice. If I read something and it's just not, I feel like nothing is coming out, I'm not feeling a strong presence, I'm not feeling somebody who like really truly needs to exchange something with me, then I don't get attracted to the submission. But at Hooligan, like I just feel like I want to amplify the voice of something that excites me. If a submission excites me and a poem excites me, I'm like, I want everybody to see this fucking poem because it made my day. And I think like in terms of sharing poems too, that's another thing, is like there are a lot of poems that need to be written and there are a lot of poems that need to be read, I think, but there are not always a lot of poems that need to be published. And like there are poems that fit in collections too, but that's different. That's a collection. But at Hooligan specifically, I'm like, this is a poem that I hope everybody reads.
I'm trying to think of a good way to answer that question. I mean, I just feel like we want the best, and that means like you have a voice, you know what you're saying and what you're gonna say it, and like how you're gonna say it, what makes the most sense, right? Like, does this poem, for example, move me? That's what we at Sundress want. We want to be moved. That's what the Estuary Collective wants. We also want to be moved. So the idea is just that like the person that's writing this, like it feels like this poem needs to be out, kind of like what you said, Sophia. Like it needs to be in the world. We also try to publish a diverse group of people as well. Like that's also really, really important. Like they shouldn't all look like me, you know, like they shouldn't all look like one specific type of person. It should be a group of different types of people. And that goes for like age, class, sex, gender, all the, you know, like all the isms. So that like that's what one of our like main ideas is diverse, and this piece or these pieces need to be out there.
Yeah, that's similar to my approach. I like the unexplored. So anytime I get a poem about a subject that I've never seen a poem written about before, that gets me excited. That gets me very interested in the work. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be something like, you know, pop culture or recent or nascent necessarily. It could be about antiquity for all I know. I went to FSU with a poet named Dorsey Craft, and Dorsey writes pirate woman persona poems. And I really love that because it's just different, it's fresh, it's not necessarily a perspective that is absent from literature, but certainly like it's not a perspective that we see highlight. Her collection is called Plunder, by the way. I'm gonna put her in the chat right now. Dorsey Craft, Plunder. She's doing something with imagination. She's doing something with form and with genre and context, but she's also like she's playing, right? She's Dorsey Craft is not a pirate. Like you didn't hear it from me, but she's not. But I love that she created a world, and so she did some world building, and then she created this, you know, this pirate woman, Anne Bonny, who's experiencing different things. And I think that playing in that space is really important. I think the majority of why I don't accept something is due to a lack of imagination. There's so much that hasn't been spoken on yet. There's so many secrets that we all have. And I think that sometimes to get my attention and things like that, you got to go into the uncharted territory and maybe feel a little weird. Like, ooh, I don't know if I want to write a poem about this like douche I bought when I was 14 and I, you know, whatever, did that. Maybe that's strange. Maybe that's too intimate. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Send me, if who has a douche poem, send it to me. That's what I look for. Just something different.
I feel like with Kissing Dynamite, I think we prioritize a lot of poets who aren't necessarily like popular, like the not I shouldn't say popular, but like the traditional poet, and like in terms of what they bring to the table. So I feel Kissing Dynamite publishes a lot of younger poets. We have published a lot of high school students, and we've also published a lot of Nigerian poets. So me and Jeni have gone on the record several times to say that we stand Nigerian poets. Like we love, like every single time a Nigerian poet submits to Kissing Dynamite, we're like, yes, more. When can we get more of this? Chapbook when? Because in our experience, there's just been this craft that I don't necessarily, that's this craft that is very different from the Black American experience, that is just in this approach to creating words and worlds that we just find beautiful and moving. And like with what Rita and Ashley have said, is that we want to be moved. I also specifically love like playful imagination. If I'm reading a poem and I'm bored, or if it's cliche, then I'm just gonna be turned off by it. I don't want to read it anymore. Like if I know where the poem's going by line 3, I'm not gonna finish the poem. But I really think that a lot of poets love writing sad poems. And I get it. We're all on our sad girl bullshit. Like I get it. And also, hear me out, hear me out. Wait a minute. What if you had fun? Like, and I think that poems should be a source of joy. I think, of course, every emotion should be explored in its many nuances, but at the end of the day, I will always prioritize poems that give me joy. I remember one time when I was serving as a reader for Texas Borderlands, I read a poem about sharks that was just like, it was about like, it was Shark Week. The poem was called Shark Week, and it was just about like, and like, I feel, if I'm remembering correctly, the poem was very much so going, it was about global warming and like sharks rising up and like unionizing to eat humans. And like it was such a fun poem. Like I had such a blast reading it. And I still remember it. Like I think about that poem all the time. So I think, and even though we ended up not being able to publish it because like just because of the rounds that we were going through and what we were specifically looking for with that issue, like it just didn't match the issue that we were going for. It still was such a blast, and there's an audience for that. Like I think that so many people are like, I have to be really serious, I have to be like really deep, and like you can talk about deep and serious things without like making me super depressed. I am already really depressed, y'all. I don't need help. I don't need help. Like
And I
Truly.
think, oh, sorry, Sophia,
No,
go
you
ahead.
go.
Oh, okay. But I just want to say, Zora, I think you point out something else for me. It's just that like if I get to the end of a poem and like I want more, like that's like the most beautiful moment. Like what? It's over already? That's one of the most beautiful things. My cat is crazy. Sorry, y'all. He's a new one. Um, but yeah, like please write either more poems, write a book. I'll like if it makes me like search up this person, like that's
Totally.
the ticket, right?
There will be like times where I'll be like, did this person drop a Twitter in their bio? I know that I can't see their bios, but did they drop the Twitter? Because if I can't find it, I'm like, I need to know. And that's another thing too that I think submitters, and even me on the other submission side too, I forget. Just because you didn't get picked doesn't mean somebody didn't like reading that poem. There are poems that I'll be like, this is not a Kissing Dynamite poem, but Jeni, you should read this anyway. Jason, did you have something to say?
I think the only thing that, outside of everything that's been said, one of the things that we really look for is how far away from the canon can you get. We want poems that you won't find in Poetry Magazine, and you won't find in American Poetry Review. I mean, I've often in meetings, in when recruiting people to read for us, when talking about the magazine, I've referred to us as trying to be the ethical poetry magazine, where we do what they most likely started to try to do, and that is publish good poetry that supports the communities that are feeding it versus what it's doing now. And I really still think that we're doing that. So I mean, even though we get some poems that probably would get published in we're not gonna tell that lie. We get poems that are like the poems that you find in Poetry Magazine, but worse. We're not looking for that. We're looking for the different, the odd, the strange. So that's basically what I mean. We're definitely looking. So if I find that in a queue, I want to read it first.
Are you all okay with me opening it up to audience questions? If anybody has a question, any of you attendees have a question, drop it in the chat. And it's okay if it's to a specific editor too.
Except for me. I refuse to be addressed. Thank you.
Jason would like to not be perceived. Thank you.
While we're waiting for questions, I just want to say I love the energy in this space. I love you all so much.
I
Thank
love
you
y'all
all.
too. It feels really good to be having these conversations and having them in spaces that we have all created and generated together. I think that makes all the difference.
100%. I also, I had something I told Jeni De La O, like when she was submitting to, I think the Rumpus, she was like, can you look over my submission? She's like, what's the first thing you do with the submission? And she said that she's never heard anything like this. So I just want to share it. But when I build a packet, I always put my most exciting, most fun, best poem first. Because personally, as a reader, if I don't like the first one, I'm gonna read the second ones, but it'll be a filter. I'm like not excited. And there have been exceptions. And of course, I always still read the rest of the poems. But if you hook me on the first one, I'm already like, okay, if they submitted 5 poems, I'm gonna take one of these poems.
I want to respond to Denise's question right here, because it's something that as a professor I'm really struggling with right now. My students are exhausted. They are so drained. They are burnt out. They don't feel hopeful. And most of their professors are being trash. So burnout is real. Submission fatigue is real. And if in the process of submitting, you find yourself sort of being like, man, why am I doing this? That's all very normal, very okay. And we can get through it together. I think the best thing I can say to people who are fatigued by submitting is that Twitter and, similar entities make it seem like, it's a contest. And we've all had the back and forth about, is poetry a contest, blah, blah. I'm not here to have that conversation. There is no such point system of, oh, you didn't submit today, -1 point. Oh, you submitted yesterday, +2 points. Nobody is keeping score. Nobody is going to penalize you or think less of you if you go 1 month and you say, you know what, I can't look at submittable right now. Again, not even the body's keeping score, exactly. And we have lived through something unprecedented coming into 2021. We have just endured so much trauma in so many different avenues of life, particularly if you live in the US. And I think that the sort of rabid race to get that first book out and hurry up, because if you don't, it's going to be doomed. Like, that's all made up. That is fabricated. That is rhetoric that comes from institutions like mine that want to make poetry into a sport, that want to commodify our work and pit us against one another in service of bureaucracy and big presses and nonsense. If your craft, and if you sit down and you're writing, you're sending out, your craft is not feeding your brain and making you excited and helping you think, okay, what do I want to do next? And if it's not feeding your heart, giving you peace, joy, comfort, whatever, don't submit. Take a break, take a hiatus. Just walk away and honestly take it out of your tabs, clear your cache. That is the best advice I can give. Do not ignore your instincts. Capitalism wants to really sink some claws into what it is that we do, and art cannot obey the rules of capitalism. It's not possible. Art does not kowtow to capitalism as a force. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Anybody tell you otherwise is not interested in your well-being and the future of your art.
I think about that a lot as of late, as a person that submitted it had to be like 200 poems in 2019, because in my head I know
Braver than any US
Not
Marine.
judging, just
I'm not judging. I just think you're better than me because
Hey.
That one right
That
there, what
part.
Zora said. Yes.
But like, and this idea of like being tired of submitting and do I need to submit? And I agree. Sometimes you have to step away and like take the break and refuel. But also, like, I mean, I've fully forgotten that submittable is a thing until I get that like that notification that says no, you're not in this, sorry, you lost, and then I'm like, oh, okay, well, damn, right? Like, but like I've personally, I don't have the app. I don't even know if you can get the app anymore, but not having that app is so lovely. Not having something to go click on and look at. I don't have submittable like on a tab or anything. I have to type submittable.com into my for it to even pop up. And so like I'm not thinking about it. And I think in general, when you're thinking about like that pipeline of when do you get your first book? When do you get your first book? When's that? You know, because a lot of people will ask you that. When's the book coming out? When's the book coming out? And I felt that way. One of the things that I thought in 2019 was super, super like awful, but now as I'm really sitting in it, is it like it makes sense, was I think it's maybe palette poetry that says that, you know, Kaveh Akbar didn't get his first book or their first book until what 10 or like their first submission didn't get picked up until 10 or 12 years into writing poems. It doesn't have to be today. It can be tomorrow. And but if you're not here tomorrow because you've burnt yourself out, then it can't be tomorrow. So you have to take the time for self-care and thinking about yourself versus that submission. You know, honestly, Night's Library gonna be here tomorrow. If I'm here or not. Night's Library will be here tomorrow. I set it up that way. If you want to submit tomorrow, submit tomorrow. If you want to submit next week, submit next week. Yeah, we close. But to be honest, I just looked at a submission that was in our closed submission period and I said, you know what? Let's go ahead and throw it in the packet. It's fine. But you have to take care of yourself. So
I want to add two things to that. I think that, you know, especially coming to poetry from an academic space, there's this very like publish or die mentality, right? Like if you're not publishing, then you don't exist, right? And I think that you have to seek out spaces purposefully that don't make you feel that way. And that was another reason we founded the estuary. We were like, you know, poetry is lonely enough as is. I want to be published in places that I'm proud of, that like make me feel great. And like we want to, like, that's why we've been doing workshops as a generative form of like, you may not want to be writing a poem by yourself, but if you write your poem in workshop with us, then you have a poem that you know feels good because you had like three poets you trust look over it with you, give you ideas for it. And you know that these same three poets that helped you workshop with it are going to be submitting, like are going to be your submission cohort to this zine that the estuary is also putting out. Like, you know, you're in an inherently supportive space. So I encourage with burnout, one, take care of yourself and take a break. Like, don't keep pushing yourself beyond your breaking point. But also, once you feel better enough to start resubmitting, go to places that make you feel good. I personally, which brings me to my second point, is I personally am nowhere near like, I don't look at Submittable. I only go on Submittable to apply for retreats or fellowships. I never go on Submittable to submit a poem. And that's because none of the poems that I want to publish, or none of the poetry publications that I want to be a part of have a Submittable interface to work with. And there's a reason for that. I personally don't want to make my poetry feel like a job, feel like I'm like a slave to Submittable that I have to check every week to make sure that I'm getting my work seen. I find it exhausting. I find it anxiety inducing. It doesn't make me feel good. What makes me feel good is sending out to independent poetry magazines that I know, or at least, even if my poem isn't gonna get selected, is at least gonna make the editors feel happy. They're like, oh hey, this was a fun little poem. I like this. Like, and that's why, and if that means I have a smaller pool of poems that are out in publication, that's okay for me. Like, I don't need to have personally 10, 20 poems out at a time. I need to have like 6 strong, good poems that I'm proud of, that I know will make people be happy to read them. And that's why I currently have only 6 poems out. And that's fine with me. And like, for me, it's not a race. It's not like I don't think of my poetry within the context of capitalism. Poetry was never going to make me money.
No.
Nor would I want it to.
And
Poetry is here for the very purpose of my joy and the joy of my community.
Totally.
Mhm.
And on that community note, I was going to say, if you don't feel like submitting and you need recognition or you need somebody to read your work, you can get that anywhere. You can get that at Luminaries. I also, with Belinda Meneza and I.S. Jones, I run a poetry workshop / community called Luminaries. Always willing to read a poem. There are people in that room that are always willing to read a poem. I am always willing to read a poem. My email is literally sophia@sophiafay.com. You need somebody to read a poem, send me a poem. I will always read a poem. All of my friends are people who always want to read poems. Poetry can be so isolating. And I think that submissions are really not the answer to that. It's really a side. It's something that you can do. It's something that you will do, but it is not going to solve your problem. If you need community, do not look for community in submissions. Look for community in Luminaries. Look for community in the Estuary Collective. Look for community with anybody here. Look for community with anybody in the attendees. If you personally don't have any poetry friends, or you know somebody that doesn't, you can literally direct them straight to my public DMs and I will make it happen. Or a lot of the people here are the same way. So yeah. Invest in your
Listen,
community.
I love nothing more than getting somebody's poem in my DMs. Nothing brings me more joy than to get a poem in my DMs from one of my mutuals, or even like a non-mutual who's like, hey, I've interacted with you a lot and like, I think you're dope. Please read my poem. I love that shit. Please continue to send me poems in my DMs. Also, gonna do a short plug real quick. Estuary's putting out a movie zine. Send me your movie poems.
I'm actually sending a movie poem myself soon.
Yes. Do it. Go to my Twitter or the Estuary's Twitter, and the submission stuff that you need, info you need, will be on a poster on one of those 2 accounts.
Ashley, what do you think about, do you have any thoughts about submission fatigue?
Yeah, and this is literally coming from someone who just yesterday, like, I think it was yesterday, texted the group chat like, oh my God, guys, look what I did. I submitted one thing. Yay, clap for me. Because it's like throughout this year, like, not only just like teaching is hard now during the pandemic, because I mean, teaching is hard on its own, but within a pandemic, it's like, oh crap, now I got to deal with 110 other people's emotions. But but it's just like, it gets so tiring and so draining, like, especially when it's a piece that you really believe in, but like people are like, no, but like, it's at that point where you have to like really sit with yourself, talk to yourself, and like evaluate what your next step is going to be. If that means you don't submit anymore, great, fine, do it, make yourself happy. If that means you take a break for a few weeks or a few months or a few however long, do it. If you plan to only submit, I don't know, during the summer, because that's when I have time, do it. Don't make anyone else make you feel rather that you're not doing what you should be doing, because like my poetry stuff looks a lot different than Jason's, and Jason's looks different than Rita's, and Rita's looks different from Zora, and Zora to Sofia. Like, everyone's process is completely different. Our works are all different. And just like someone had said earlier, just because a mag doesn't pick up your piece, it doesn't mean it wasn't a good poem. So maybe that just means you waiting for like, someone to open that you've been waiting to open for a while anyway. Like, or maybe that just means you're just sitting with your poems like, hey guys, what's going on? Even though they can't talk back to you. Well, sometimes they can. But just like giving yourself that space and that grace. Like that's the most important thing. In my opinion, just keep your mental state at least, at an equilibrium. Don't, put yourself too high where like a loss is really going to crumble you, but also don't put yourself too low because then you won't have the confidence to submit. Like just, like at a decent content-ish middle area.
Totally.
That's, yeah.
Also accountability partners. Like I don't
Yes.
necessarily use them a lot, but I know
Love
a lot
that.
of people on this roundtable do, and I think that like it helps you. Sorry, my cat just made a noise. He's fine. But it's like makes sure that you're, because it's hard to build confidence at first, especially if you're like submitting to bigger journals. So having an accountability partner who's like, are you submitting to things, like will help you keep yourself at a decent pace to where you're submitting to the places without like psyching yourself out, while also not like going overboard. And it'll help you over time build confidence and like know what your boundaries are.
Yeah, and just to add on the note of boundaries, I just want to say this. I don't know who needs to hear this, but it needs to be said. It is absolutely nobody's goddamn business what your process is. If you're in an MFA program and everybody's like, did you see so-and-so idiot review, his deadline is coming up on Friday, are you ready, blah, blah, blah. You're like, yeah, already sent in. It's nobody's business. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your process, for your energy, and for your craft. So don't be afraid to like, keep that to yourself. If that's something that's private and you don't really want to have a big old like, everybody's talking about where they have work out, everybody pulls up their submittable page. If I know like in a lot of times, especially with creative writing programs, there's a lot of pressure to sort of like, measure dicks and be like, what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now? You have no obligation to partake in those conversations. You can get out of that simply as saying, what, actually, like I'm kind of working through some stuff right now and I'm not ready to talk about that. But when I am, I'll be sure and let you know. But you have no obligation to tell anybody where you are and are not sending out. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise is no friend of yours.
That felt so pointed at me and I loved it, but thank you.
It was just for you, Jason. That was what you needed to hear.
On an accountability partner note, luminaries, we're actually going to be having a little May like submission period, like window, where I'm going to just open up a Google Meet. Anybody who wants to join, we're all going to be submitting at the same time. A lot of us did the 30 for 30, and I personally am not submitting at all anywhere in April because I want to have a packet for May. So if you want to get that invite to the luminaries submission thing, I was also thinking while we're there, I was going to like see if anybody was looking for accountability partners so that everybody could see who all was looking. But I have one more question, and it's a small question, and then I wanted to do some housekeeping and kind of wrap up. So the question is, what is one thing that you wish all submitters knew? And we'll just go around and then I'll close out.
I'll start. I wish all submitters knew to ask their friend to read their poem first before they send it in. Because you may think the poem's done, but you're biased. So maybe give somebody else a check first before you send it to me.
One thing I wish submitters knew is that editors are people. Like we get, just like we send out rejections and acceptances, we also get them. And so please don't rush your editors. We're human beings.
Similarly, I wish submitters knew that most of us do this labor for absolutely no compensation whatsoever. That is how much we love writing. That is how much we love literature. And that is how much we believe in the power of art. I think that especially like, I'm at a point in my career where I have a lot of privilege, right? I have a PhD, I'm a professor, I have a lot of stuff that I can use to help me be visible, right, in these spaces. That being said, nowhere that I work pays me. And that's not a complaint, right? Like one of these magazines I mentioned, that's my baby. I created that with one of my best friends. It's a labor of love, and we're happy to do it. But sometimes I think there's a sense of sort of inside out or outsider discourse, as if like maybe people who are editors know something that you don't. There's no, that's not true. There's no such discourse. Some editors are paid. Some places, charge for subs so that they can pay their masthead, and that's great. That's not the model that most of us operate under. And so to echo everything that's been said, just please be kind, take a moment, learn the names of the people you're about to send to. It's not hard.
One thing I wish submitters would all know, honestly, that it's not personal. It's not. We're not rejecting your work because we want to ruin your life. It has nothing to do with, I mean, it really 99% of the time, it literally has nothing to do with you as a person. It has everything to do with the work that we've received in our box, how much space we have in whatever specific issue that you are submitting for, and who else is in that submission. And it's not like we're combing through to see if we have the big names or anything like that. It's literally just, I have, for us, we put about 15 things on our 15 things. Well, yeah, 15 things each issue, right? So it's like, prose, poems, interviews, all that stuff. 15. We don't want to go above that because it gets too long. I'm not trying to, sit here and say, oh, you know what? This person works for this magazine and they didn't put me in that magazine. So, oh no, they're not going to be in mine. No, it's not that. It honestly is just us trying to work with what we got. So
Totally. Well, that's all we had. Thank you everybody for bearing over 16 minutes over the hour. I think this was a wonderful conversation. The Editors Roundtable is a series. This is the very first one, so thank you to all the editors here for being here with me. I'm going to be having one every 3 months. I'm planning, they're all going to be recorded. They'll all be put on the Hooligan YouTube channel. If any editors watching are interested, let me know. It is a paid opportunity. We sell the tickets basically for donations. And I'm going to split it evenly amongst all the editors. Yeah, stay tuned. And submit to Hooligan, submit to Honey, submit to Sundress, submit to Kissing Dynamite, submit to Night's Mag, submit to Split Lip. Anybody I forgot? Submit to Stone of Madness. I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, y'all.
bye.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye. Thank you for coming.